my cigarettes, loaded with regret, and I find myself a spot between space and time.
Bellari makes excellent products that are both affordable and unique. I have tested their solid-state amp, the HA543, and their tube hybrid, the HA540 Mark II. And now I have a new Bellari toy for you. Justin Allen at Bellari sent me the SE560, which they call their Excitr. It's an EQ box that is dead simple to use and actually does what it's supposed to. Like all Bellari products, the 560 is made of metal. It's heavy, sturdy, and simple to operate. There are 3 smooth turning knobs on the front. The furthest knob on the left is for bass. The one right next to it is for, they call, definition, which I equate to treble control. And the one farthest to the right is for volume. There is a button in the middle to either activate or deactivate the 560's tuning. The unit also has a bright blue LED. This is a powered unit. It has an RCA in and RCA out. The LED is always on, even if the activation button is off. In other words, once you plug this thing in, it will always show you its blue LED, much to my chagrin. The red paint on the unit is pretty stunning. It's better than the red paint on the Loki P20. The 560's paint job is shiny, smooth, and reminds me of the Ferrari red color. One thing I noticed, however, is that the bass knob's gold paint is rubbing off in some spots. From this, you can easily assume that's the knob I used most often in the last several weeks I've had the SE560. The 560 is similar to the Schiit Loki, but where the Loki has 4 general zones of adjustment, the 560 has only 2, plus the volume attenuator. The 2 devices are the same price. However, the Loki's build is a little less impressive. The Loki is slightly lighter than the 560. Its knobs are harder to turn. Its silver casing is frankly downright ugly in comparison to the 560's Ferrari red. Just like the 560, the Loki is a powered unit. However, the Loki does have an on-off switch. Unfortunately, as with all Schiit products, the power switch is on the back. The Loki also has a passive and active switch on the front. You can leave the unit powered on and select whether you want the Loki to adjust EQ or not through the switch on the front. For this review, I decided to compare the 560 directly to the Loki on both a tube hybrid amplifier and a solid-state amplifier. I chose the Monolith Liquid Spark and the Bellari HA540 Mark II with its stock tube. I used my HD6XX and played songs through Amazon Music HD. The 560 passes the signal to the amplifiers without adjustment if the unit is not active. You hear the unadulterated sound from your DAC this way. However, you can still control volume through the 560 even if the EQ is not active. This allows for finer volume control if that matters to you. The 560 acts like a pre-amplifier to the amplifier. The volume knob will increase volume even with the EQ deactivated. My HD6XX gets plenty loud on the 540 around 8 o'clock, but I can blow out my eardrums by increasing the volume through the 560 without touching the volume knob on the 540. The experience was similar when I switched to the Liquid Spark. The Loki does not have a dedicated volume knob. The 4 knobs on the Loki adjust sub-bass, mid-bass, mids, and treble. You can try to equally adjust all 4 knobs together for volume adjustment, but that's just too much work. As I said before, the 560 is dead simple to operate. You don't need to factor numerous frequency adjustments. If you want more bass, turn the bass knob. If you want more sparkle, turn the definition knob. And if you want to further fine-tune, just use the volume knob. The Loki, by comparison, will require you to think about which knob you want to turn to affect the best result. If you want more sub-bass rumble, maybe you should decrease the mid-bass or mids instead of increasing the sub-bass. And if you want to get more sparkle in the treble, maybe a very slight treble increase combined with a slight reduction of mid-bass is what you need. For those unaccustomed to EQ, the Loki can get confusing. And if you don't EQ at all, then the Loki will be downright frustrating. EQ requires finesse and slight adjustments. Less is usually more, and often it's better to take something out of another frequency range than to vigorously increase the one you want to hear. And every single adjustment will require some playing with the other frequency knobs on the Loki. Bellari's overly simple solution is to give you half the options. Does this result in half the effect? For the first test, I plugged the 560 into the Liquid Spark. I had the Liquid Spark's volume knob at 9 o'clock and the 560's volume at halfway. This provided very comfortable listening volume to my HD6XX. The 560 faithfully passes the signal without alteration when the unit is not active. But as soon as I turn the device on, the effect becomes noticeable with both bass and definition knobs at their midway points. The first thing I noticed was an immediate decrease in volume by turning on the 560. I increased the 560's volume to compensate. I played Mountains by Hans Zimmer. The sub-bass was barely noticeable. I turned the 560's bass knob to 3 o'clock and that sub-bass became apparent. It didn't overwhelm the rest of the frequency range. I further adjusted the effect by increasing the Liquid Spark's volume. I then played around with the definition knob, turning it down slightly. This caused the sub-bass rumble to become bloated and overwhelming the frequencies. Turned the other direction, the definition knob took a little of that bass bloat away and provided more clarity. I switched to Pure Water by Mustard and Migos. With the 560 turned off, the HD6XX had intimate vocals with a present bass that wasn't hard-hitting. There was a little sparkle, but the treble was obviously rolled off slightly. With the 560 active, I played around with the EQ. With the 560's volume knob at 3 o'clock, the Liquid Sparks at 9 o'clock, I turned the bass knob to about 2 o'clock and the definition knob to 3 o'clock. The HD6XX turned from dark sounding to a more defined headphone. There was more vocal sparkle, more hard-hitting bass, and the whole frequency range was bumped up to level fun. I could moderate the EQ effect by turning the 560's volume knob. I went through several other tracks, including pop, orchestral, folk, and jazz. Every track I used was affected by the 560 combo. I could adjust one way or another and always found a setting that altered the HD6XX's sound signature. If applied zealously, the 560 would distort the music. I then switched to the Loki and connected it to the Liquid Spark. The Loki will also faithfully pass the signal unaltered if you so choose. But whereas I could quickly and easily adjust EQ on the 560, I had to constantly tune and retune the knobs on the Loki. Very slight adjustments make no audible difference at all. Instead, to hear a difference, I had to adjust one setting so much that I had to adjust one other to compensate. It was like spinning plates. The Loki's adjustment did have an effect once I got them to audible levels, and they certainly provide much more finesse than the 560. On Mountains, for example, I turned the bass knob to max and heard the sub-bass rumble, but it wasn't quite enough volume. When I increased the volume on the Liquid Spark, the bass distorted. I played around with both bass adjustments for several minutes before I finally found a combination of bass controls and volume that provided some more bass rumble than through the passive mode alone. Of course, that meant having to restart the song after I finally achieved the setting I thought was acceptable. I kept adjusting the EQ as the song played again and was able to achieve sufficient sub-bass presence without bloating. It did not sound like any of the settings on the 560. I switched to Pure Water and was met with a better experience. I elevated the sub-bass and treble. I was able to get increased bass impact and a slight bump in the sparkle, yet it was a little muddy. I again adjusted the knobs and eventually found a combo that elevated the bass with a clearer presentation than before, but it did take a while. I repeated the same test with the other tracks I used on the 560, and it was always the same thing. When I thought I had one frequency just the way I liked, I had to slightly adjust another. Unfortunately, since the Loki is not capable of slight adjustments, I had to keep adjusting. I next decided to repeat the test on the HA540 Mark II, the tube hybrid amp. I'll spare you the second-by-second description. The 560 easily modified the sound signature through the tube amp. There was a noticeable difference when I turned the 560 on and off. I was able to distort the sound when I pushed both EQ settings to the max. However, 75% application of either or both EQ settings did not cause distortion. Distortion is most evident when the bass feature is pushed to maximum. I switched to the Loki and tube amp combo. As with the previous test on the Loki, this one resulted in the same plate spinning technique. I would adjust one frequency to an audible level, then immediately have to adjust another one. Of course, I was able to achieve a pleasant EQ setting, but not quickly, and on every occasion the effect was vastly different than on the 560. I bought the Loki about 2 years ago. I've had it hooked up to one of my amplifiers, but I rarely use it. Part of the problem is the number of EQ parameters. 4 is both not enough and too much. It's a curious situation. 4 parameters obviously provides more room for fine control, but Schiit's implementation of EQ is so lackluster that I simply cannot get the perfect setting for me. The EQ adjustments are audible only if you turn the knobs considerably, at least 10 to 15% in either direction. This means that although there are 4 parameters to adjust, you're constantly adjusting them far too much. Proper EQ requires at least 10 bands of control, in my opinion. 5-band EQ is laughable, and the 4-band that Loki has is clearly not sufficient. Look, I am not an EQ expert, and most people aren't either. That's the rub. Schiit markets itself as an audiophile company for normal people. And normal people don't want to sit in front of the Loki and mess with the EQ knobs. They want instant gratification. Maybe that's not a real audiophile perspective, but it's realistic. Someone with a lot more patience and experience than me might be able to do wonders with the Loki, but I can't. I've tried many times in the last 2 years. And maybe it has something to do with my headphones. That perhaps, if I used very sensitive headphones, the effect would be more pleasant. But if we're going to use a product for the masses, then we should use audiophile headphones that the masses tend to like. Most people will buy affordable headphones. For many, the HD6XX or 660S are the end for their audiophile journey, either because they don't want to spend more money or because the sound signature is precisely what they want to hear. I simply do not think the Loki is for the average person. Someone might be able to love it, but not most, I don't think. This brings us to the 560. You'd think that if the Loki's 4-band EQ is insufficient, then the 560's 2-band EQ would be completely unacceptable. But Bellari has done something quite different, and I'll explain. Schiit's approach is giving you the freedom to contour the signal with 4 bands. Bellari has pre-tuned the 560 so that your choices are less cumbersome and less frustrating. The bass boost surprisingly does not become harsh or bloated or overwhelming until it begins to tax your headphone drivers. The same is true for the definition or treble adjustment. Bellari pre-tuned that as well. In other words, when you turn these knobs, you're merely deciding how much of the coloration you want to add. Let's take a cooking example. If your recipe requires some salt, black pepper, oregano, dill, and parsley, you would need to use the correct combination to achieve the taste you find pleasant. A little bit too much salt and the rest of the mixture is lost. Not enough dill won't make a huge difference, on the other hand. But when you reach for a bottle of spice mix that already has the combination of these spices, your choices are immensely limited. With the spice mix, you get to decide how much of the mix you want in. It's easier to figure out the taste when you only have one parameter. Bellari's 560 is like a spice mix. It's got the ingredients pre-selected. All you need to do is decide how much you want in your recipe. The 560 works great with the HD6XX and 660S. It works amazingly well with cheap headphones like the Rane Commercial RH50. Add as much seasoning as you like and enjoy. But the 560 isn't for everybody, and it won't suit every single headphone. And its seasoning might be not to your liking. There's always the chance that you will hate this as much as you hate EQ on your DAP. But after many weeks of using the 560 with various gear, I'm quite pleased with its effects. I don't want it all the time. But when I do need the 560, it's so darn easy to use and the results are so immediate that I'm glad it's on the desk. It provides instant gratification, the type the Loki simply cannot deliver. If you're in the market for an analog EQ, I highly recommend the Bellari SE560. It pairs incredibly well with both tube hybrid and solid-state amps. Of course, depending on your amp, this combination may not be to your tastes, and that's just the whole part of learning to use your particular gear. And as I said previously, the 560 isn't going to be for every single audiophile out there. There are some individuals who can do wonders with electronic EQ on their DAP or phones, and then there are some who simply want more choices, more fine-tuned control, and real EQ selection, which, frankly, the Bellari doesn't offer, and neither does the Loki. But if you are just the other type of audiophile, the type who wants a little bit of spice here and there, or a lot of spice just to kick it up a notch, then the 560 is probably the one you want to select over the Loki. And I don't know of any other EQ box that does what the 560 does.